Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines. Available for download on all major digital platforms. The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online, you're now listening to the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined by professional medium Michael Ray Cheer, who channels Joseph. Today's interview will discuss the book Your Life After Death, which gives a detailed description of life in the spiritual realms and the consequences of our thoughts and actions whilst on Earth. The book presents probably the most comprehensive account ever written of just what lies in store for each of us when we leave the earth and our physical bodies behind. Delivered by Joseph, who has lived in an enlightened sphere of reality beyond the veil for thousands of years. Michael Ray Cheer, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Great to be with you again.
Now, Michael, it's great to have you on the show, but just for the viewers, just briefly summarise your book, Your Life After Death.
Yes, I think it's in the title. We put Your Life After Death. We titled it Your Life After Death because it does relate to every person on Earth and the experiences that they will have upon physical death. It is a book that describes the various spheres that we go through on a journey following physical death and moving onwards into infinity and a reconnection with God. It describes the landscapes, it describes the processes, it describes the mental attitudes that we will have and the mental attitudes that we will rid ourselves of. And it is a manual really for what happens to us next. And Joseph felt that this would be one of his most popular books. And it is, because it relates to each of us. We're all on a one-way street. We're all moving in the same direction. And one day, like it or not, we won't be here anymore. This book explains where we will be. And it is a book not filled with hope, but hopefully filled with happiness, because it explains what happens to us. And it is not the traditional view of heaven and hell. It is a journey of continuing harmony and elevation of vibration into the light. It is a journey of bliss.
Now, your first chapter is called The Last Chapter. what happens to the soul before it's liberated? Just give us a brief explanation of that chapter.
Well, yeah, the first chapter of Your Life After Death concerns what happens to us next. But Joseph begins the book by saying that he has to look at what happens to us whilst we're still on earth. And that each of us goes through an inevitable journey physically and mentally, in that we come to this plane, but we have that release date already built into our nature, into our physicality, into our mentality. And so we're on an arc, we're on a journey. And we reach the top of the arc during midlife, or whenever that is appropriate for us as an individual. And then we start to come down from that arc towards an exit point. As we come down from that arc, the body slowly relinquishes its hold on the spirit, and the spirit extricates itself by degrees from this physical world. It knows that it has to return to where it came from. And so very slowly we are distanced from this physical world to the point of physical death. But the point of physical death is actually the start point of another, far more exciting journey that takes us through a number of spheres of being, spheres of spirituality, spheres of consciousness that take us away from the earth and into, eventually, via those cleansing spheres, as Joseph describes them, into infinity and back to our true angelic nature, because we are, as Joseph says, angelic beings. But we became trapped here because of the effects of the fall on us mentally and physically, because of a situation that occurred millennia ago that we have yet to escape from.
Right, so near-death experiences or, altered consciousness, have you dealt with that?
Well, Joseph hasn't discussed near-death experiences. He's discussed altered consciousness. But I can actually relate to near-death experience because in the trance state that I'm taken into as I work with Joseph, I have on 2 occasions almost exited this world. I was prevented from doing so, but I've exited this world. In certain trance circumstances, I can see myself. I can see myself as Joseph. Joseph is inhabiting my physical body. Joseph's inhabiting my physical mind. And I can see myself stood next to him or behind him also as myself. So I have a doppelganger. I'm looking at myself delivering Joseph's words, but I can't influence that body or that mind in any way, shape or form until he has, in effect, vacated the premises and allows me back in so that I can become myself physically and mentally on a physical plane again. But during the trance sessions, on one occasion, I found myself in a wonderful cathedral. I'd gone away from my body totally. I'd no idea what was being said or done with my body and my mind. And I found myself in a beautiful cathedral looking at a statue of an angel. And I was fascinated by the beauty of this statue because the angel was moving, it was alive. And behind the angel was a door. And I knew that if I went through that door, I'd die, I'd be gone. But in that state of altered consciousness, elevated consciousness, I wasn't worried about it. I felt wonderful. I felt in better health than I ever feel on earth. And I thought, well, if this is dying, off I go. And so I approached the door and was immediately barred from going through it by one of my guides, who sort of wagged a finger at me and said, turn round. You're not supposed to go yet. And I came back into my physical body. During a recent trance demonstration, a recent trance session, I was feeling quite ill in my physical life. And as a result of that, the liberating bliss of being away from my body, again, called to me as something that I needed to do, to go over. And I thought, this is so simple and it's so blissful. This is where I want to be. And again, I was prevented from going by one of my guides and was turned back. And I can only relate to people's near-death experiences as being like that. I've spoken to people who've had near-death experiences and they've felt such bliss But there has always been someone who said, "Not now, child, it's not your time," and turned them back into their physical body. But they've been able to describe things that are going on around them, as I can when I'm in a trance state. So death is not the ogre that we think it is. It's not the terrible set of circumstances that we think it is. But that doesn't mean we haven't got to live our lives. And that doesn't mean that we should today think, well, I'm off. I'm going to die now. I've had enough. I can't put up with it anymore. We're here for a reason. We're here to grow and evolve. So yes, we can have near-death experiences, but the fact that they're experiences and not actual death means that we have to come back here and live this life until it's time for us to go.
Right. So only a near-death experience will wake them up to make them look at life differently. Would you say that a negative near-death experience is a real experience, or one that's sort of, created because we feel that we belong in such a place like that, so we create that reality?
Well, it depends on what we consider happens next to people when they've moved on from this physical sphere. And Joseph talks about the lower astral in your life after death as one of the areas that can be resided in for a while by certain souls. And that's quite a dark place. That's a place where, for example, if you've been particularly violent towards people, you find yourself living with people who are exactly as violent as you are. If you are somebody who has been incredibly selfish, trod on other people and just thought about yourself and acted just from a self point of view, you find yourself packed in with people who are exactly like you. And that's a terrible thing to contemplate. Now, I'm not saying that people who have had negative death experiences deserve to go to the lower astral. Nobody deserves to go to the lower astral. It is simply a matter of cause and effect. But what they can pick up on during a near-death experience is moving through those areas of lower vibration as they travel to a higher sphere. And I think that's what they retain as a memory of their near-death experience. Most near-death experiences are quite blissful, and there's a feeling of great release for the time that the person has escaped their physical body. But there are some negative ones, and that is because of the passage through areas of heavier vibration, of heavier thought, that can pull at someone and can pull at their soul and can pull at their physical body and their mental faculties when they are in the state of almost passing over.
And does like attract like then? For example, a negative person, you go to that reality, that negativity when you pass.
Yes, like attracts like. We can only harmonize with a similar vibration to the vibration that our soul puts out. So, for example, if we have built around ourselves subconsciously whilst we've been on Earth a view that there's nothing after death, then that's what we bring to ourselves as a reality, in inverted commas, not a permanent reality, but a perception upon leaving the earth plane. If we are, as we've talked about people in the lower astral, if we are a very violent person, a very selfish person, a very introverted person with regard to giving out love and energy, then we harmonize with a similar vibration. And so we pull towards us the reality of what we are, which is quite shocking, really, when you consider, as Joseph says, that every thought is known, every action is known, and every action and thought have a consequence when we pass over. So we can't expect to get away with things as we do on Earth. We can hide things on Earth, can't we? We can bury things on Earth, pretend that we're not like that. We're not that person. We don't manipulate. We don't use. We're not violent. We're not selfish. We're not power hungry. But all those things are the reality of our soul. And when we move over to the spiritual side of life, the reality of our soul harmonizes with a similar vibration and brings us more of the same, even if it's just not being able to acknowledge that there is something after death. I remember sitting with my teacher many years ago, the lady Joan, who's now on the spirit side herself, who developed me as a medium. And it became evident that there was someone with us spiritually. And through the fireplace, as these things happen, came a man in a white coat. And he said to me, I don't believe in you. And I said, well, that's a great opener to a conversation. I do believe in you because I can see you. I don't believe in you, he said. You're a figment of my imagination. And he went on to explain, he kept talking to me, that he'd been a scientist and that he was in the woods, he'd gone for a walk, and he'd fallen down. What actually happened is that he'd had a heart attack. And he refused to move on because he didn't believe in the afterlife. And we had a philosophical discussion for 20 minutes, half an hour, at which point his mother came for him from the spirit side of life. He recognized her and moved on with her into the light. But my point is, that man had been lying in a wood, undiscovered, his physical body, for quite a number of days. He'd been standing by the side of himself saying, none of this exists because I don't believe in it, and had to be moved out of that frame of mind by somebody arguing with him intellectually to prove that there was life after death, to the point that he could see a relative who had come for him and taken him away into the light. So again, he created his vibration of disbelief during his life, had put it around himself, still existed, but couldn't relate to the people who were coming to help him because of his belief.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And well, for him, and for example, people listening to this now may think, well, crikey, I can't help my thoughts all the time. I don't judge my thoughts completely. But if I'm going to end up in a sort of low astral plane, what's the way out of that? Is it to sort of raise your vibrations now, in a sense?
It is, but I must say that the lower astral is not for most people. It's not where most people go. Most people are honest and decent people. But it behoves us, if I can use such a word, to elevate our vibrations as much as we can whilst we're here, so that we will have some concept of the life that awaits us. It's important for us to examine reports of life after death and to make our own minds up about it, and to open our mind to the fact that we are going to die. A lot of us, we rush through life at 100 miles an hour. We have our televisions on and our radios on, and our mobile phones we're interacting with people all the time, and we can't stand silence. And the reason we can't stand silence is because in silence we have to think. In silence, we have to consider ourselves and come to terms with ourselves. And in silence, we have to consider those things that we're frightened of. And the vast majority of people in the Western world certainly are frightened of death. They realize that time is running out for them. But what I'm saying is, don't be frightened of death. Examine the texts that exist. Examine the information that exists. Examine good mediums, competent mediums, and form a picture for yourself, evidence for yourself that proves to you that there is life after death. And then, as my teacher again used to say, if we're not going to die, which we're not, how then should we live? And the answer is carefully and lovingly. Because if we live carefully and lovingly, if we consider others, if we consider that we shouldn't harm anything, that we should send out light to everyone, to every form of creation on this planet, and we should hold people in our best view of them all the time, then we are preparing ourselves when we move on from this plane for another level of existence that we can harmonize with, that enables us to take the journey through the spiritual spheres and into infinity that much more quickly, because we're prepared for it. You wouldn't set out on a journey without the necessary equipment, would you? If you were going up a mountain, you take mountain climbing equipment with you. You just wouldn't set off in slippers and shorts and sunglasses, for example. But we do the equivalent whilst we're here. We're not prepared for death. We're not prepared for life, spiritually speaking, but we're certainly not prepared for death. We need to have some equipment with us, some understanding of death. And so we need to consider it. We need to embrace it. And we need to say, yes, I am going to die, but I'm still going to exist. So I better prepare myself for that. And I better look at how I've going to live life in the meantime with a view to going on into the spiritual world, but also with a view to getting on with my brothers and sisters, everyone else around this world.
And would you say that, happiness is very important? What is happiness in Joseph's opinion?
Yes, happiness, of course, is harmony. If you define happiness, an object can give you happiness for a while, or a certain situation can give you happiness for a time. But happiness, as we define it physically, is a fleeting pursuit, is a fleeting objective, and nothing seems to make us happy in the long term. And the reason that nothing makes us happy in the long term is because happiness comes from that connection with what we are. And what we are, one, is a spiritual being, and what we are, two, is a part of God. And we've masked that, we've forgotten that. And so the transient things that we put around us materially can never bring us true happiness. Also, there is great happiness in losing yourself to the service of others, no matter how you do it. It might be that you help people who are ill. It might be that you counsel people. It might be that you pray for the world and bring light into the world. It might be simply that you can give a smile to somebody and make someone feel better rather than concentrating on yourself. And there is great liberation in that, and great harmony in that spiritually, and great happiness in that as you lose yourself, you discover that you gain your greater self. You become more than you were in your isolated world that concentrated just on you. So the path to spiritual happiness lies in knowing yourself, in knowing that you're not going to die, and in knowing that you can make a difference and can help others.
And what does Joseph say in regards to why souls come down to planet Earth to have a violent or negative experience? For example, I'll be the murderer, you'll be the victim. What is the purpose of this, or any negative situation? How does Joseph discuss this?
Well, Joseph says that our natural state as spiritual beings, the spiritual beings that we really are, is one of bliss, and is one of harmony. We don't harm ourselves in the spiritual realms once we get above the lower astral. And on the lower astral, people attempt to harm each other, but they are not actually harming each other physically. They are harming each other through spiritual vibrations. What we have to do when we come back here, and we've made a decision to come back here, and Joseph is saying we shouldn't make that decision, we should make the other decision. He suggests that we should make the decision to move on away from this world, but he acknowledges that souls do come back. They're pulled back because of the materialism that we talked about earlier, because they think that they can sort situations out in a further life that they haven't been able to sort out in this particular life. And so they are pulled back into physical reality, into this plane of existence. And so once they're pulled back into this plane of physical existence, the materials that are available are used in the hope that they will evolve spiritually. So they come back into a violent arena, they come back into a discordant arena. And sometimes, yes, a soul can only learn by touching the fire, by saying, gosh, that's hot, I'm not going to do that again. I shouldn't be violent again. That didn't feel right. And also, souls in any situation that seems negative to our view, for example, a murder or some act of great violence, there is always something good going on in that situation. Not by the situation itself, but by the effect that it has on the person, the people involved in it, and the people whose lives those people touch. So in other words, the material of the earth, the situation of the earth that we put ourselves in millennia ago is being used to uplift us through experience, even if that experience is negative, even if that experience is only to say, I shouldn't have done that. Because at the point that you say, I shouldn't have done that, you've evolved. Because if you hadn't evolved, you wouldn't have said, I shouldn't have done that. You wouldn't have known the difference. So sometimes out of the violence, and it has to be out of the violence with a view to not repeating it, something positive comes. A soul or souls are elevated to the point where they leave behind that violence and start their journey back into spiritual knowledge.
Now, your book, Michael, talks about the arrival point or buffer zone, rescue missions. What are these?
Yes, yes. I don't know whether you're referring to what happens to souls when they arrive, but for many years, I don't do it now. For many years, I worked with my mentor at night on what were called rescue missions. And we would find ourselves, and we could correlate what had happened to us. One would start the story of what had happened to us the night before. The other one would finish it. And we both had identical memories of what had happened to us. And we would find ourselves faced with a liner. We would be on a shore, and there would be a liner in front of us, a beautiful white liner. And attached to the liner at the back of it was a smaller boat that had a covered area on it, like a little tent. And there was a very high spirit in that tent, in that area, that was directing operations on the boat. And people from all walks of life, some of them in their pajamas, some of them in business suits, some of them in work clothes, some of them from different races, different backgrounds, would get onto the boat. You could see them coming down the shore and getting onto the boat. And the top deck of this liner was lined with benches, nothing more on it, no superstructure apart from these benches. And the people would sit on the benches. Some of them would have scars on their faces, or they'd been in accidents, they were bandaged, they'd been in hospitals, and now they found themselves on this boat. And we would be directed by whichever spirit was directing us on this particular night to sit with certain of these people and to talk to them and to calm them, because a lot of these people were panicking, were upset. But as the boat set off from this shore and moved towards a distant shore in quite a rapid amount of time, what we said to them, and remember we were using our soul facilities, not our conscious facilities, to talk to them, to reason with them, suddenly calmed them. And you would see bandages fall off. And you would see wounds heal. And you would see old people becoming young, particularly as they approached the other shore and saw lining that other shore relatives that they thought they'd lost decades ago, husbands and wives and sons and daughters. And they would, from being in great trepidation upon getting on the boat, change to bliss at seeing those relatives and couldn't wait to get off the boat when it touched upon the other shore to be reunited with those relatives on the spirit side of life. And you might think, well, why is there a boat? That sounds like nonsense. And Joseph says it's because a lot of people have expectations of what should happen to them when they pass over. They feel that they're on a journey, and they feel that if they're going from this life to the next life, there should be an element of journeying involved in that. And so these constructs, like the boat, which I've seen on numerous occasions, are made available to them so that they can get across mentally as well as spiritually to where they should be on the spirit side of life. And so sometimes there will be a boat that turns up for them. Sometimes there will be a train that turns up for them. And none of these things are real in the way that a train or a boat is real on Earth. They are constructs of energy that people feel comfortable with so that they can be taken through this buffer zone to where they are supposed to be on the spirit side of life, one of a number of spheres. I saw one person, the gentleman was a roundhead. There were a lot of battles where we live in this area. And this gentleman turned up, Jane and myself, my partner, were visiting a church. And this man turned up and was obviously distressed and had been around for a few hundred years and wanted to move on. And I talked to him. I asked my guide what to say to him. And suddenly a river appeared in front of him. And across this river came a rowboat with some people in it that he recognized. He got into the boat and disappeared into the light, and that trapped soul, or had been trapped to that moment, was suddenly released by his own volition of wanting to get into the boat and go across to the spirit side of life.
It's incredible, and time for him would have not been the same.
No, for him, only a few moments would have seemed to have passed. And for him, he was hanging around, that's a terrible way to put it, but hanging around a graveyard around that church, he would wonder why people couldn't talk to him. He would have been trying to attract the attention of people for hundreds of years. But fortunately, with me being mediumistic, I could see him. And so he'd got an opportunity to talk to somebody who could then explain, listening to their guides, what was going on with him and how to get across to the other side. But I've seen all sorts of vehicles turn up for people, carriages, boats, planes, all sorts of things, just so that people can feel comfortable with their transition from the physical plane they know to a spiritual plane that they don't yet know.
Right, and what does Joseph have to say about, seeing spiritual leaders when you pass? For example, Jesus or Buddha.
It's extremely possible. We do that now. We create thought forms around ourselves by our dominant vibrations. And many people do see Jesus. Again, I can illustrate what happens sometimes because of people's entrenched beliefs with what happened to my father's mother. And I know about this with conversations with my dad since he passed over himself. My dad's mum was a staunch Catholic and used to go to church twice a day, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And she found herself, when she moved over, in a church praying because that's what she expected. The unfortunate thing is that the last time I checked, and it's many years since she passed, she is still in that church. My father has been to try and get her out of that mindset, but she believes that that's the way that she should approach God. And so she is still in that construct of her own making until such time as she thinks to herself, well, there must be more than this. And at that time, my dad might be able to get through to her and say, look, there's a greater world than this church that you're in to examine. Why don't we go and examine it? Or some high spirit of light might be able to get into her and say, look, this is the way. This is the way to evolve. This is the way to greater love. This is the way to meet your God. So yes, we do imprison ourselves to a great extent by our beliefs and by the energy that we put into those beliefs.
But then would you say a soul chooses certain constructs in its life, certain families, certain religious beliefs, for it to have restrictions in a sense, and for it to experience things?
Our purpose in being here originally was to experience this sphere, the Earth, this planet, as a means of enriching ourselves as the spiritual people that we really are. And then going back in full consciousness to the greater consciousness, and then moving on to another experience, perhaps with another sphere, with another planet, with another set of circumstances. And that's originally why we came here. We then skewed events by believing we were right in a spiritual experiment that we got wrong. We speeded up matter and locked ourselves into this illusion. So the purpose of spiritual life, of spiritual existence, is to experience, to grow, to enhance, and to take back that enlarged experience to the Godhead, which we are a part of. So we choose the life that we come into because we want to experience the earth plane again. But then there are pointers along the way to get us out of that mindset and to say, yes, you've got this life, but there's also a greater life if you will embrace it and look towards it. And so the experiences that come to us, again, it's down to Joseph saying that the materials are used around us to best effect. I suppose it's making the best of a bad job, if you like, or making the best of a bad situation, so that we grow through the situations that come to us by saying we no longer want to be a part of those and we want to move away from them. And I suppose it's like hitting your head against a brick wall. Eventually you say, ow, that hurts. I must stop. And so some of the negative things, many of the negative things that happen to us are just a case of that in practice. We find ourselves on earth again. It's not where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be creative, angelic beings. We still are within, but the only way that we can shake off the effects of the fall, as Joseph describes it, this cataclysmic event that happened millennia ago, is to go back into the negativity and say, hang on a minute, I'm tired of this. There must be something more. And to actively seek out the light outside of ourselves and the light within ourselves, which is that point at which we connect with God.
Okay, Michael, well, let's move on here. Let's talk about the chapter Anger in the Spiritual Realms.
Yes, I find it quite amusing. I think Joseph does as well. Because if we take anger with us into the spiritual realms, if we are very angry people, we find ourselves for a little time in a sphere that Joseph describes as the sphere of anger. And it's an hilarious place, really, because we will find ourselves in a house comparable to the one that we've just left as we've passed on. We'll find ourselves with other people, with neighbours, but we will find that we've still got that anger towards others that we had here. And every time we get angry, things don't happen to other people, they happen to us. The house falls apart. The furniture disintegrates. We find that we feel oppressed and confined. And I shouldn't be laughing at that. It just seems like a cartoon-like illustration. But it actually illustrates to us that we really can't be angry with others, and that anger comes back and attacks ourselves. And the moment we calm down in this sphere, everything rights itself. The house is back around us, the furniture's back in one piece, the road is fine, the trees are back. And then when we're angry again, the same thing happens, which shows us it's not a judgment from God. It is a demonstration of our thoughts, our angry thoughts, being made manifest around us. Now, this is not the lower astral. This is not a sphere where people go because they have been so incredibly violent and invested so much vibration in violence that they don't know any other way of life. This is a sphere where people go who are angry at life, angry at each other, want to set things to rights and take that anger with them. And they are being shown through that sphere of anger that they have to leave that anger behind. It has no peace, has no part in the harmony that they should be a part of and that they are seeking as a spiritual being. And so that sphere teaches them to slowly let go of the anger and to also show them that they can't harm anybody in the spirit world. They can't physically harm anybody. There is no physicality as such in the illusions that they find themselves in. So they'd better let go of that anger and move on into a greater state of harmony and learn to live in harmony with their brothers and sisters, with the souls around them.
Well, let's get to the life review. And do we want to have a queue of people watching our life review? Is that the kind of life we want to create?
I think we've got to explain the life review, and it's a scary subject, isn't it? Imagine that one day, and we're putting this into physical terms, imagine that you've passed over and you're having quite a nice time in one of the spiritual realms, and one day somebody knocks on your door and says, it's time for your life review. And you say, what do you mean? And this person says, come along with me. And they take you down to a little theatre in the centre of town, and you sit there with your popcorn and you're in a comfortable seat, and the curtains go back, and it's not a science fiction epic, it's not a historical epic, it is your life, the life that you've just lived on earth. And the projector starts to roll, and you watch from birth to death, surrounded by advisors, everything that you've done. Now, how scary is that? It does go back to what we were saying earlier about you can hide things physically, you can hide things mentally, but you can't hide them spiritually. And everything that happens to us in life is recorded by us. It's within our aura, it's within our soul. And at some point, in order to progress through the spiritual spheres, we have to play that back. So it's all there, all our triumphs, all our upsets, all our thoughts that we thought we had in secret. But further than that, and what is most interesting and perhaps shocking at the same time, is that if we've upset somebody, if we've been angry towards somebody, if we've really made their life a misery, for a time during that life review, we become that person. Just for a split second, and we feel what they felt as a result of being on the receiving end of our actions and thoughts. And that's a very sobering thought. And that life review, again, is not a judgment. It is something that we are encouraged to look at by our advisors, our guides, dispassionately, with a view to what we got wrong with regard to our spiritual progress and what we got right during that life. So it exists to enable us to say, yeah, I could have done better in that area, or yes, I see where I went off the path in this area, so that we can then decide how best to progress next and what areas of ourselves we need to work on to let go of the effects of the earth plane and the negative effects of the fall, that cataclysmic event from millennia ago, so that we can progress more rapidly through the spiritual spheres.
And another fantastic chapter as well is nature of appearance. For example, do we project what we want ourselves to look like when we pass on?
Yes. Now, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? I look forward to the day when I can grow the hair back over the bald patch simply by thinking about it. You see, we're a projection now, but we're a projection in heavy matter. And our appearance on this level is dictated by a number of factors. It's dictated by how others perceive us and also how we perceive ourselves. Do we feel that we are ill? Do we feel that we are growing older? Much mention of my mentor today. My mentor, Joan, wouldn't have mirrors in the house. And she wouldn't have mirrors in the house so that she didn't look at herself and see in her reflection something that was negative that she would then build into herself. So we are a projection of ourselves. When we get to the spiritual realms, we don't need to hold on to that projection of ourselves that we have when we pass, in most cases, as an older person. And so we can decide how we look. What age do we want to be? Most people seem to choose around 35 for some reason, But then you've also got the question of, if we are a soul that has had multiple lives on earth, which I believe we are, which Joseph says we are we then able to choose that vision of ourselves, that projection of ourselves, as the default position for how we want to appear to others? And the answer is yes. So we might have been male in this life, but female in another life. And if we prefer that vibration, that projection to the one that we've just had, we can be that. We can be female. We can appear as vibrations. We can appear as balls of spiritual light. You will have seen, and no doubt people listening to this will have seen, illustrations that show the light streaming from chakras, from our energy points in spiritual paintings. Well, we can go beyond that in the spiritual realms to exhibit ourselves purely as balls of beautiful coloured light. But then that is something that happens on the higher spheres of existence, because as we move on from the earth plane, we are used to viewing ourselves as human beings. And so we connect with others in that sense. We show ourselves as human beings. But there comes a point where we can show ourselves as exactly what we want to be at that point, as a ball of light, as a man, as a woman, as a young person, as an old person. And this also relates to when we greet the people who come over to our side once we've passed, who were our relatives on earth. Because, of course, they can't relate to a ball of light and say, Dad or Mum. They have to relate to that person that they knew. So we choose, sometimes from moment to moment, our appearance in the spiritual realms, depending on how we want to relate to ourselves and depending on how we want to relate to others and how we want them to relate to us and recognize us. So yes, there's a vast palette of appearance available to us. We're not the inflexible beings in terms of appearance that we appear to be on this level of consciousness.
So in Joseph's work then, past lives are a fact in a sense.
Sorry, Karen, they are a past life. Yes, past lives, we are the sum of our experiences. We are the sum of our experiences. But he always relates a life to a suit of clothes. And it's something that you take off and put on the hanger once you've got to the spirit side of life. It's a part of who you are, but it's not the whole of who you are. And I think there's a lot of talk today and examination of past lives with a view to that one of those past lives, or several of those past lives, being vitally important to who you are today. They're not. They're only vitally important to who you are today if you've learned from the experiences that they presented you with. Similarly, that the spirit that you are is all of those past lives, but none of them, because you are beyond that. You are more than that. And so as you move through the spiritual spheres, you may start off with much of the personality that you had when you passed from the earth plane. But as you reintegrate with your spiritual self, you become a blend of all the personalities that you've been, plus who you are as a spiritual being, who you are as an angelic being. So I think it's important that we regard our personalities, and certainly regard past lives, as just a part of who we are, and not to be something that we major on to the extent that we lose the experience of the journey because we think we were something great or less than great in a past life. They're just teaching points in our limitless experience.
Yes, but if you've got certain patterns in this life, things that you've never told anyone, thoughts that come to mind, you think, well, they're quite negative. Where did they come from? I'm
Yes.
not that. Why am I having these thoughts? Could they be patterns that you've brought back from a past life that have just come into this life, that you've either not dealt with in a past life, or they're very, you carry strong patterns with you that you where do they come from?
Well, we carry patterns with us in order to evolve. I think it should also be noted that we are susceptible, whilst we're here, to the predominant patterns of the earth plane. We are susceptible to the predominant patterns of the field of consciousness that we immerse ourselves in on a physical plane once we've reincarnated. Now, we're all psychic. We are all psychic without exception, because we are all spiritual beings. We may not all be mediumistic in the way that we work, but we are all psychic. And our degree of sensitivity as a person determines what we pick up from the field around us. A lady who sat with me for a reading many years ago, it was pointed out to her that she was frightened of knives. And she said, yes, I am. And that she was frightened of using those knives on somebody. And she said, I have to sit on my hands when I'm in a room that has knives in it. And it was explained to her that it wasn't her who was violent, but she was picking up the violence of the world that her physical mind was then translating into this being a personal thing, and must be her violence and must be kept in check. So a lot of the violence that we feel are those secret thoughts that seem to creep in. The fact that you said, Kevin, that we don't want them. If we don't want them, how can they be a part of us? The fact that we're saying, I don't want these, suggests that they are coming from outside of ourselves. We are transmitters, and that we send out energy and our predominant beliefs to the world and to everyone who lives in the world. But we are also receivers. We are able to receive other people's thoughts. We are able to perceive and try and make sense of predominant patterns within the field of human consciousness. And the field of human consciousness is set at the moment, as we see in the world around us, to negativity, to violence, to power seeking, to manipulation. And we pick that up. It's one of the unfortunate effects of reincarnating. And as Joseph says, that one of the points of the books, one of the points of the information, is to prepare us for that point that which we say, I don't want to reincarnate again. I want to move onwards into the light and away from the negativity of the earth plane, so that the earth plane can be reset into the Eden that it once was, so that souls can visit it in full consciousness of being souls and don't have to go through the agony of thinking all their life that they're going to die and that there's just oblivion, and then have to go through illness, negativity, and violence. So the point of Joseph's message is to say, prepare yourself. Look, avail yourself of the information, and then make decisions based on that information as to whether you really do want to come back for another ride on this quite violent merry-go-round that is the earth plane at present.
And Michael, why would someone choose a life of addiction, or a life of, again, suffering? Let's go back. I know we're covering all ground here, but is that what the source, God, for example, wants to experience?
Yes, the source wants to experience more of itself, and wants to experience different aspects of itself, and wants to progress. so the source or God or divinity becomes more than he or she or it or whatever label we want to put onto that power through the experiences of he, she, or its children. In fact, us. But according to Joseph, and this feels right to me through meditation and through contemplation of this, in other areas of this physical universe and in other physical universes, there isn't the violence that we find on the earth plane. It's not the norm. God seeks to express himself and to investigate himself and to elevate himself and become more than he is at this point through our experiences in the bliss of creation, in the bliss of harmony, in the bliss of creating worlds and situations and experiences, but not in negativity. The negativity, the lack, the power seeking are, according to Joseph, and I agree with him in this, unique to this area of space, the earth, and unique because of that experiment that we got wrong when we thought we knew a better way of progressing ourselves than the way that is the norm in the rest of the spiritual universe, and set in motion a series of events that locked us into this perception of there being lack. Perception of there being not enough for us. Perception of everyone else being against us. Perception of having to be survive ourselves because if we don't do it, no one else will do it for us. And so it's a unique set of circumstances. But we re-enter this set of circumstances because it's seductive. We've trapped ourselves here to the extent, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about investigating what happens to us and what there is, if anything, after death. We trap ourselves in a series of circumstances, never investigate what comes next. And so when we move over, this area, because it's the only area we know, seems far more comforting, better the devil you know, so to speak, than moving on into the spiritual spheres that to many people are nebulous because they've never investigated them and never reverted to their own spirituality within that can free them from the effects of the fall.
Okay. So when we moved on then, let's just move to contemplation then, because I like the idea of the sphere of contemplation.
Yes.
It's a way of self-reflection, isn't it, in a sense?
Yes, and that's Joseph says that there is a sphere of contemplation as one of the many spheres that we pass through on our journey beyond death, and through a number of spiritual cleansing or rectifying spheres, if you will, and then out into infinity. And one of those spheres is the sphere of contemplation. And he says it is a sphere, but it isn't a sphere. It's more a state of mind, in that souls, at certain points in their infinite spiritual existence, decide that they will go into the quiet, into the silence, into the peace, and they will contemplate themselves and their lives to this point. They will contemplate God and creation by linking with God and creation, and they will contemplate what they want to do next, and how what they want to do next will affect themselves and affect the souls around them, and will also affect the souls on earth who are being pulled up to higher spheres by the efforts, by the effects of the souls that have passed on before them and are moving through the cleansing spheres towards infinity. And it is a glorious sphere to be quiet. It is a glorious sphere that enables us to examine what we are spiritually. And it's a sphere that can be accessed by people on earth. And it goes back to turning off the television, turning off the radio, turning off all the noise and becoming quiet and having the strength to make friends with ourselves, having the strength to meditate and to go within and to discover that point within at which we are one with God. That point that influences our intentions, our view of earth, our intuition, and to glory in that, to feel the harmony and the love that is available for us from the Godhead and from ourselves, and to be quiet and to be still. What's the rush? We're not going to die. What's the rush in getting things right? We can enter that sphere of contemplation at any time for a top up to our peace, to our sense of purpose, to our sense of what to do next for ourselves and for others. And then we can move back out into the life that we happen to be living at that time, whether that life is on earth or whether that life is part of our ongoing journey through these spiritual spheres.
Now, Michael, I've had many different guests come on that say there's sort of unlimited possibilities to incarnate onto rather than just planet Earth. But what does Joseph have to say?
Yeah, there are infinite possibilities and scenarios and experiences that we can go through. But from the earth plane's point of view, we built into ourselves a condition of fear as well, haven't we? And so if we know very little about what is ahead for us, we tend to want to come back to the earth rather than be frightened by the prospect of what might be out there. Again, it's a case of looking at what's out there and thinking, gosh, that sounds fantastic. And then when we get to the spirit side of life, we have opened our mind and our soul to possibilities and can be shown some of the scenarios that are available to us if we choose to move on rather than to incarnate. We've trapped ourselves in a little bubble of experience within a mighty ocean, or oceans, plural, of experience. And we think that this little bubble is all there is. The point of the Joseph communications, which come from Joseph and from millions of souls in his soul group, is to say, look beyond that. Look beyond that. You keep putting yourself through the same ringer. You don't need to. If you can pop that bubble, there is something wondrous ahead for you. And I can illustrate that with having seen the nature of group souls at work on a number of occasions. I've been privileged, and thank you, God, for that privilege. I've been privileged enough to be able to see group souls at work on certain occasions. And I remember being taken, elevated out of my physical body to a plane of existence where there was a wonderful, wonderful landscape. And that landscape had no curvature to it. I wasn't on Earth. And I could see beautiful fields, and I could see a river that was made of silver light. And I was taken, my feet touched down on this wonderful, springy, beautiful green grass. And there were a number of people working together on some project. I don't know what the project was. It was above me, above my mind. And they were all in similar coloured robes. And they impressed on me that they were members of a group soul. And there was such harmony and love between these people, not only for each other and for themselves, but for the work that they were engaged in. And stood next to one of these group soul members was a rock, like a standing stone. It must have been 6-7 feet high. And they made me understand that that rock, being part of their landscape, was also regarded as part of their group soul. And so there was no distinguishing between a human soul and the soul of the rock, as it were. They were impressing on me the total integration and harmony of their landscape. The sky was a perfect blue. There were streaks of colour coming through the sky towards me and past me, and I asked what these things were, and it turned out that they were people, they were souls thinking themselves from point A to point B on that landscape simply by volition. No need for aeroplanes, no need for cars. Simply by wanting yourself to be somewhere, there you were. I've seen other levels where people appear to be made out of light. That's the only way that I can relate to them, because my eyes are not adjusted in vibration to seeing on that level. I've seen people that seem to be human form but made out of light, or seem to exhibit the qualities of crystal when you look at them. I've seen landscapes that are towering, majestic, wonderful, without end, that make anything that we have on earth look, I've got to say, puny by comparison. There are colours and sights and sounds and perfumes that we don't get here. And those, the places that I'm relating to, are just in the initial spheres of our advancement away from the earth plane. So what wonders life ahead for us in infinity? wonders beyond imagining. And in moving in that direction, rather than moving back to the earth plane, we are releasing ourselves from the mistake, or the mistake sounds judgmental, from the judgment we made that resulted in the earth as we see it present. We're moving ourselves away from that, back into the heart of our spiritual family, and back into our creative capability to move on into infinite, wonderful experiences.
Now, there's other spiritual gurus like yourself, for example, Eckhart Tolle. Let's just cover Eckhart Tolle for a minute. Now, he talks about the power of now, as we are still here on planet Earth, and it's important to be here in the now. You know, now is all we have.
Yeah. First of all, very kind to call me a spiritual guru, but I only see myself as a channel for information. I always get the ego out of the way if I possibly can, so that the people who work with me can get a truer message across, because I'm not there messing things up. But yes, you're talking about Eckhart Tolle and the power of now. The point of power is now, but if we expand on that, there's only ever now. Whether the now is on earth, or whether the now is us in one of the spiritual spheres, whether the now is us as part of God and being aware of that, there's only ever now. Time relates to here. And this is a very difficult concept to get across to people. Well, of course, there's time. There was yesterday, there's tomorrow, there's now. But I always relate it to, there was a game show on in the 70s called The Generation Game, which I'm sure many listeners or many viewers will remember. And at the end of the Generation Game, whoever was the winning participant was made to sit behind a couple of doors, which were then opened, and there was a conveyor belt in front of them. And along that conveyor belt would come a number of prizes, and they had to memorize the prizes. Well, I relate experience outside of time to being a viewer of an infinite number of experiences at once that come across a conveyor belt, as it were, in front of you. You can only see one of those or a number of them at the same time, but it doesn't mean that the others don't exist. So outside this framework of time, everything is the now. It's just a matter of us putting our conscious, our volition into wanting to experience certain parts of the now. And yes, the point of power now on earth is extremely important, because now is when you are considering spiritual things. Now is when the energies of your soul, you as a spiritual person, can help others, can decide to help the world, can decide to send out light rather than anger, can decide to send out peace rather than discord. So the now is vitally important, but we have to also understand that we are part of the greater now. And that the now one day for us, from our linear point of view, will be a now when we are in a non-corporeal existence. We are in one of the spiritual spheres. And so it's important to us to use the now, so that now that is coming to us, again, we're having to talk linearly, is something that we can experience to the full. Is a now that we can move on in and experience the glories that await us, those glories that have been awaiting us for centuries, for thousands of years, can be appreciated once more, and we can use them for the betterment of everyone.
Now, Michael, the sphere of communication with God, talked about in your book, is that one of the prime purposes, is to reconnect to the God source, i.e., who we truly are?
Yes, we've forgotten who we are. We've masked who we are because of the effects of the fall. We've masked who we are because we believe that this earth is the only thing that there is, and that physicality is the only reality. The sphere of communication with God allows us to take time out to go within and to connect with that God center, and to connect peacefully with God and feel that wave of love and inclusion and harmony and purpose that comes to us from God on a constant basis, but is usually masked and dismissed by our physical minds and our physical existence. Also, the sphere of communication exists so that we can synchronize, as it were, with the God that we really are, and say, what next? What next for me as the individual? But what next for me as part of God? And what would you like to do through me, Father, in conjunction with my free will? I'm connecting with you, and a free will saying, I'm part of you. How do you want to manifest through me? And how do you want me to manifest your power, your energies to others? What is my purpose? What do I do next? How can I become more aware of my connection to everyone that I meet and to everything that I see? How can I take care of everyone that I meet and everything that I see? How can I take care of myself and my family in a godlike manner? And what should be my responses to people on the earth plane and in the spiritual realms based on God consciousness rather than earthly consciousness? So it is time out to reconnect to what we really are, to experience that beat of energy that comes from the Godhead to us, to be healed and uplifted by it, and then to put it to work as we, in conjunction with the God within, wish to work it to change things.
And finally, I mean, I sort of skimmed over the last chapter, but love, in a sense, you know, a sort of a different view of life after death with love there.
Yeah. Joseph calls the last chapter a different view of life after death because it concentrates on the love with which we are received after we have passed on. And some souls, a minority of souls, might find themselves in the lower astral. Some souls will find themselves in a sphere that is very similar to the sphere that they have been living in whilst on earth. Some souls will find themselves in very elevated spheres as they recall their soul memory of who they really are. But the whole process is a process of love. We've talked about the life review, but that life review is not made in judgment by anybody. That life review is made in order that we can better understand ourselves and progress through the spiritual spheres and back into infinity. There is help and there is light that is channeled towards the lower astral. So that the minute that those souls decide that they don't want to live that life any longer, that life of violence or selfishness or manipulation, they can instantly be brought out of that sphere by the love that surrounds them. And so the journey that we have from our physical point of physical death onwards is one of love. And there is help for us at every stage. There is counseling for us at every stage. There is harmony for us at every stage. And the whole purpose of the spiritual spheres beyond this one is to get us back to a state of our angelic being, is to get us back into infinity when we recognize that love instantly rather than having to be told that it is there or having to search for it. Our whole journey here, it may not seem so, but it is one of love. It is love from within ourselves. It's love from around ourselves to guide us gently out of those situations that are causing us pain, that are causing everyone else pain, and to get the whole family back to that start point so that we can begin other infinite adventures as part of the God that we are.
And what is Joseph's most important message in this book, Your Life After Death?
Remember and surrender. So remember who you are. The whole thrust of the information is to enable us to go within, not to look at the books, not to say, well, somebody says something is right, so it must be right, but to go within and to realize for ourselves who we are, that we are spiritual people, that we're not here to harm, that we are creators. We're just creating the wrong play, the wrong scenario. And it's just as simple to reconnect with the light and to create the right scenario, a scenario of peace and harmony and supply for everyone. So remember is one of the words, remember, but also surrender. Be brave enough to surrender to your greater self. Be brave enough to surrender to those urges from within that will enable you to change yourself and to change this world for the better. We're never going to do it on a material level. We're never going to do it with violence. We're never going to do it with manipulation or seeking of power or with religion, with conventional religion. We have to do it by remembering that we're part of God, remembering that we have a sacred duty to be loving to everyone else and to ourselves, and to remember that we all have to get out of the experiment we placed ourselves in, and all have to get back into infinity and into a state of bliss.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a delight.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can watch and listen to all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.